All right, hello everyone. There we are. Hello. Welcome to Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel. Today we're going to talk about Grand Austerlitz, and you are looking at the French map here because I played on the French team, and this was quite an epic game for all of us. I see I have some people here, so let's invite everyone to speak who was part of the. Well, we got Blaze, we got Achilles here. A lot of you were also involved in the game, but I don't want it to become a free for all. So just sit tight, but we can bring people up to talk. I see Sar wants to say something, so we'll bring you in soon. Um, and I want to say hello to Blaze because Blaze, this was your game. And I have a lot of opinions about this game, but the predominant one is that this was an absolute masterpiece. You have repeatedly demonstrated your ability to run outstanding events, and I am very excited to see what's to come. I'm curious to learn about your system, but maybe not right now. I had a chance to look at the dice. I like some of the mechanics that I saw there. Um, but let's talk about the event. And real quick, I also want to say hello to Achilles, who's also here. And we're gonna pull Dave up here because he was part of the commentating team. Dave and Achilles were commentators on the stream. But Blaze, hello, and what were you thinking, man?
Hi. Yeah, I suppose the reason, well, I wanted to run a big game. That's what my system was sort of designed to do. It was for uh, the very largest game, sort of at like army level. So I wanted to run something big, and then I was looking at different battles and things, and I picked Austerlitz in the end because it's not enormously big. It's pretty big, but it's not like Leipzig or something where it's really too big to ever do.
Hmm.
It's quite famous as well, which is a downside in some ways, but it means it's well known. And also, it was the anniversary was last weekend, so there's that as well.
It was a great choice. I think everybody got excited. There was some lead up to this battle that you ran for a couple weeks before. We had a couple. I mean, there were several commanders on the Allied side, and then there was one on the French side. Did you do what I call it turning the scenario 90 degrees? Because one of the things that I frown upon in general, just from my own experience, is running strictly historic events. You have to do something to change it up. Otherwise, the players are powerfully tempted to do what the historical figures do, and you just get a rehashing of history, or even worse, you get players telling you, well, that's not how it was, which you don't need to hear that. Um, did you turn this 90 degrees on its head at all?
To some extent, yeah. The sides, the stuff they had wasn't exactly historical.
Hmm.
I think the coalition had a bit less. I think the French had about the same, although some of the names of units and that sort of thing I've changed just so that people don't really. It's a bit less clear as to what's what and things. Also, I rather than starting with the historical deployments, I started it a day before roughly, although the realistically the day of maneuver historically took like a week or two. But I started it with both sides off map more or less, so they would hopefully end up in not exactly historical positions, and they'd end up sort of just getting an interesting battle on the Austerlitz map area.
And what were the general problems that you set for both sides to work through?
Okay, so the French's main problem is that to begin with, the coalition outnumber them quite a lot. They control the field to begin with, but the coalition has a much larger army coming towards them, and most of their army is off map, marching to the battlefield. Uh, those players, I think you were one of them, were given the option of either doing forced marches or doing just a regular pace. I think they
Mhm.
both chose to do a forced march, um, which tired them out somewhat and made them fight less well in the battle. But they got there a lot quicker.
Mhm.
Um, so their sort of problem is, can they hold off the coalition long enough to allow the reinforcing units to come into full effect? Um, and then the coalition's problems, sort of to complement that, is that they've got three different commanders, so it's quite difficult for them to coordinate. So they have the Kutuzov, who's the army commander, who's technically in charge of everyone.
Mhm.
But you've also got two emperors who are there. You've got the emperor of Austria and of Russia, and they technically have authority over their own nation's units. But also, there's a conflict there between them and Kutuzov. So it's sort of, can the French hold off long enough, and can the coalition coordinate well enough to attack the French in time before their reinforcements come into full effect?
And one last question then. How did the coalition resolve that problem? How did they solve that problem, or did they?
Um, I'd say they did fairly well. I don't know how much of the coordination was accidental and how much was actual like messages and things. Maybe I think if there's some coalition players here, they might be able to speak a bit more on that. But um, they won, and I think they were fairly well coordinated. Um, yeah, I think they were fairly well coordinated, so I'd say they solved the problem.
Well, good, excellent. All right, we got Dave and Achilles here. Dave, long time experienced umpire. In fact, he's working with me on the big, huge red versus blue campaign. So he's earned his chops a long time ago. Dave, first of all, what do you think? Just kind of overall impressions, and then what do you think you found most surprising or interesting about the battle?
My overall impression of the game and the battle as a whole was that it was fantastic. It was fantastic to be a fly on the wall on everyone's shoulder as they were getting reports and finding out what they were thinking. Something that you don't often get in a lot of Kriegsspiels, that you kind of hear the news live and really find out and get into the heads of some of the commanders and what they're thinking at that moment. And I was speaking to Achilles about this earlier today, but I kind of came to the conclusion that it was just like a comedy of errors amongst everyone, and those who get over their mistakes quickest and make the fewest mistakes win. I would think is a fair assessment of this game. But it was amazing to watch, and it was fantastic just to just to see things unfold. It was truly fascinating.
Achilles, this was your first time commentating, I think,
Hmm. This
and
was.
you seem to really enjoy it. Was this the most fun you've ever had, or the greatest fun you've ever had?
I would say it was the most greatest.
The mostest greatest.
You bet.
What was your impression? Now, Achilles, you have some experience, and in fact, just prior to this, we were running a little exercise, and you were
Mhm.
sharing some of your wisdom. I think you read a book somewhere or something about the army sometime,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
that's
years ago.
and that's and that's why you were doing some coaching. Um, and valuable stuff, and I'll be posting that to the Patreon later today. That'll be on the Patreon channel for people who want to take a look at that primer on cavalry tactics. But nonetheless, what was your kind of take on the whole game?
Well, first of all, let me ditto with Dave
Hmm.
there. It was fantastic. It was a beautiful game and extremely well done. Um, and also, something that Dave mentioned earlier, and I agree with wholeheartedly from watching it. The fewer mistakes, obviously, the guy who makes the less mistakes usually wins. And you were talking about the coordination aspect for the coalition force. Really, what their coordination came from the local commanders, and particularly in the northern area, where they didn't really have orders from higher up. They just acted together. They started talking to each other. What do we do? And and they started coordinating with each other on the ground. And this is something that I talked about in that in the exercise that you were talking about earlier with my guys in their briefing. Is that there's a greater flexibility for those guys on the ground at the point of contact because they're reacting immediately. Whereas what they're sending to the Army commander or their higher commanders, that's going to take time to get to them and then take time for orders to come back. And by the time it gets there, that situation has changed. But the guy at the point of attack, he has the most flexibility to react immediately to a situation. And you really have to trust your commanders. In this case, I think their lack of coordination from the higher echelon played into their own hands in that sense because they had some good local commanders at the point of contact at the most critical area who coordinated with each other and reacted extremely well.
Mm. Good. That's good analysis, and that's yeah. I had some of my own thoughts on this, and command and control and coordination was a big deal, particularly from the French perspective, because I was the commander of the French Fifth Corps, who was responsible for almost all of the heroics that day. I'll say. Um, we won't talk about how they ended up, but um, I think the command and control and coordination was missing, particularly from the French side, and I think it really was a liability. Whereas the Allies were able to turn that to an advantage, and like you said, I think the Allies were able to demonstrate local initiative. They also had the power, the numbers, and the position to turn that advantage into a steamroller, if you will, ultimately. Whereas on the French side, that lack of command, control, and coordination meant that we couldn't get reinforcements where we needed them, and we ended up just, again getting bowled over by the enemy. So it was a rough experience for me, but it was a brilliant demonstration on the part of the Allies. To get more into this, I'm going to let Blaze talk about just a general overview of how the battle unfolded, if he will do that for us, so that anybody who's listening to this who has not seen the battle can get kind of a general idea of what happened during the game. Blaze, you there? You got it?
Yeah. I don't have a map, but I suppose I can just describe it. If I don't know, do you have a map on the stream or?
I
Sure.
do.
Anyway,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if you wanna load into the module, I can give you a promote, and you can load whatever. In
uh,
fact,
sure. That's yeah. What's the game called?
it's just Kriegsspiel, and the password is IKS, all lowercase.
All right. I
So what?
suppose I can start describing while I'm loading in.
Yeah, you can.
So both sides formed up in sort of loosely historical positions. The exact location of each unit's a bit different, but they weren't exactly the same units anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Um, the That's prior on the night before the battle. They were in more or less historical positions, but the coalition were much more concentrated in the north than they were historically. And then overnight, the French withdrew um, to a stream from one stream to another. The second stream around the town of Stepanitz. I think they thought that they were at risk of being outflanked from the north, which they were probably by the coalition. I can't get my TTS are working, so I'll just need to keep describing. Although their withdrawal was a bit piecemeal and things, and they ended up only some units withdrew by the overnight, and some ended up with withdrawing in the morning, but they were aided by a fairly dense fog in the morning, so they weren't really they were able to withdraw fairly easily. Meanwhile, the coalition were advancing quite cautiously onto that plateau that the French had just vacated. I think they must have thought that there were still French there due to the fog, and they were a bit unsure about how far they could advance, so they spent about an hour just sort of cautiously waiting. I think you can join the game now, actually. So they spent an hour just sort of cautiously waiting for the waiting to advance and work out what was actually happening, and that gave the French time to withdraw. The password was IKS, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah,
all
all
lowercase.
lowercase.
Yeah.
I put in as uppercase soups. Anyway, so the French eventually did withdraw back to their intended positions, and just shortly after that, I think it was the advance guard in the third column of the coalition came into their northern flank, and that's where the sort of first contact was at a town called, I think, Christian or something, Kristen. I think I should actually be joining now.
Christian or Kirchen?
Yeah.
We
and
have
that's where
issues with
you
it, yeah.
were, Marshall, as well.
Right.
So then there, I can actually draw things now. Just wait for them to load it up. So they did a fairly well coordinated attack. There was only about one brigade or a division of French in that town at the time. This is the opening state, okay, or the French module.
Yeah, I have the French module. While you're sorting out and loading in, I'm showing some screenshots that I captured from the debrief that shows everything. So I have one that shows my corps heroically standing against the onslaught of the Allies, the coalition.
Okay. So so this is the first. I'll paint it in blue since it's French. So this is the first line, roughly where the French were.
Right, we see it.
Which is basically their historical position. But then towards the end of the day before the battle, because we had some pre-battle maneuvers, they saw a pretty big coalition force around here. Although it did actually withdraw overnight to about here, but then it came back the next day anyway. So the French decided to pull back to roughly this line and continue south. They also relocated, or they were meant to relocate this division down here, but I think they thought that was happening in the morning rather than overnight or in the evening. So they waited until the next morning and ended up quite exposed. But the coalition wasn't very aggressive in the beginning of the day, and the fog as well. So they were able to get out, covered by this cavalry here. So meanwhile, about maybe 8 or so, the coalition are very slowly advancing, but they're quite cautious because I think they still thought there's a lot of French here. While there's a couple of other columns going on a flank attack to Belititz here. This is actually the Imperial Guard. They've withdrawn, so they were back down in reserve here. So they are coming to here, and this unit's withdrawn by that point as well. So all that they're really facing is, well, I think they expected to hit the French flank here, but they ended up seeing this town of Christian quite exposed, and I think they had some good cavalry scouting, so they worked out that this was actually the French line here, and they attacked it. So at this point, they can't really move 6th Division because it needs to cover here. The cavalry, I think, was being committed in the south. So the only real reserve is the Imperial Guard, and this whole flank is at risk of collapsing. So the Guard is committed very early on. And then later on they bring in the Grenadier Division from over here. And I think 6th Division as well is replaced by first, I think, and I think first is replaced by reinforcements coming up. So they had a few more reinforcements, but they were quite heavily outnumbered most of the day, and that's where the fighting started. Then eventually, I think the central coalition units, I think it was second column, realized that the French were not on this plateau and ended up coming along here and found Stepanitz fairly empty. The reason for that was that the French were planning an attack in the south here. They were planning it, I think the idea came about 8, but the attack itself didn't start till 10 or so, really. So they were massing all the cavalry and 3rd Corps, who is off map over here. And it took them a very long time to prepare, and they just sort of stood there for a while. So, and I think the French overall plan, I'm not entirely sure though, was to lure the coalition up here and then sort of crush them with the flank attack there. But this attack was just too poorly coordinated and took too long to get going, and they actually lost in the north quite badly. So, but we'll get to that in a minute. So then they're pretty much pulled all the reserves south, and 3rd Corps arrived at this point, but they ended up just marching north and south all battle and not really being committed anywhere. So that leaves a massive hold at Stepanitz. I'm not sure it's Stepanitz or Slepanitz, but whatever. Which means that the Russians can sweep north. They'd also sent some stuff around this way, which eventually burns the baggage, and that leaves this whole area, which is the Grenadiers and the Guards, pretty much encircled, sort of like this. A certain French commander then advances, attempts to advance, and ends up getting cut off completely, but refuses to surrender and is, I think, killed or possibly captured forcibly. A lot of units here end up surrendering, some escape. The Guard was trying to hold at the end of the day, but they had routed, which was really bad for morale. They reformed down here-ish, but they were in quite bad condition, and yeah, they might not be able to get out, I don't know. Meanwhile, this attack here in the south, they were only really facing a few brigades of cavalry, so the attack was a bit weird in the sense that they had a massed cavalry charge with basically, I think, the whole reserve cavalry corps charging up these heights, and then followed it in with infantry. You'd expect really to be the other way around, where you have infantry first, then the cavalry sort of charge, drive home victory, sort of thing. So, but they did take the heights, since there was only really a few brigades of cavalry on them. But then there was pretty much a whole fresh coalition column here, and at that point, the whole north had collapsed, and the south had received orders to retreat. They're not really sure why, since the communication was quite poor. But they received orders to halt the attack and retreat. And yeah, that's pretty much a narrative of the battle. So at the end of the day, you have the French trying to form a rearguard here and pulling back here, and Napoleon running back to Vienna and Paris. Yeah.
It reminds me of an old Roman proverb that says, he who does not strike first will be the first struck. And I think that's kind of what we see here is the French did not strike. Instead, they got struck. And when they finally did attempt to strike, it was already too late. The situation in the north had already collapsed, or was collapsing. And it's remarkable because for a while I thought we were doing pretty good. I had gotten some good dispatches from my division commanders and others. So I thought that we were doing well enough that we had repulsed the enemy attack and we could actually revert to the offense to put pressure on the enemy and disrupt his plans. And instead we actually just marched into an ambush because the Russians were breaking through in the south. So that was a tough time up north, I gotta say that.
Yeah, I mean, you were holding off here. It's just you were also getting encircled on either side. So, and all the smoke, all you could really see is this area.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. We have some of the players are down below. We got Cookie and Sar who want to speak. Was Cookie one of the umpires, or was he a player?
He was an umpire, and he helped with a lot of the prep and things as well.
All right, let's invite him first, and he can pop up here, and then when he does, we'll get his impressions. Hello, Cookie. Good to see you. Welcome to Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel. What did you want to share with us today?
Yeah, I wanted to come back on the command and control part because initially when me and a few others were talking about how to structure it, we were thinking about how to simulate the command and control problems the coalition had historically. And the idea we had was just giving them fewer commanders and giving the French essentially more layers of control to get more commanders on the ground at the point of action for actual control. But it seems that sort of backfired to a certain part in this game, partially because we did not quite simulate the command and control delays on the coalition side how we wanted it to go, and which sort of allowed the coalition players then to command their troops more directly than the French, while we intended the opposite, and then partially that the French side did not really use their, at least to my, from what I saw, the command and control there to the full extent that the marshals really got clear orders to and clear directives to push from the south for Soult or for Davout, where they could actually do what they were supposed to do as marshals.
Yeah, I found something in running Kriegspiels that's kind of counterintuitive, but it's that less is more. Meaning, if you have fewer commanders, even if there's multiple layers of command, that you tend to be more efficient and you tend to get your will done. Whereas when there's more commanders, more human commanders, it's actually more opportunities for things to become disjointed and messed up and go wrong. So it has kind of that opposite effect. So it's really telling to hear you say that. Really cool, actually, because I think there's a lesson there for scenario design.
Another part that sort of played in, which was sort of forced on us, was that in the days prior to it, we sort of had to replace like 4 players, and on the same day, we also had to get 4 or 5 new players slotted in because they had to drop out or did not show up out of some reason. And that also didn't help with familiarity with certain plans which they drew up beforehand.
Yeah. Sometimes those raw logistics get into the mix, and then it comes down to the commander in chief to get the players up to speed very quickly and efficiently, and get them in on the plan. And yeah, that's a real challenge, but that's going to happen anytime. And it happened in real life. I mean, commanders got shot off their horses, and a subordinate or somebody else who might not be as informed about the plan has to take over. And that's part of the mess that is Kriegsspiel. Czar Alexander, you're here. Welcome to see you. I don't know what role you played in the game. That's a joke. But what did you have to share with us?
Oh, offensive. Well, I wanted to actually speak about how the French were coordinating in the battle. So I read Napoleon's dispatches to his commanders, and I was like, as I further read into them, I was questioning how come that despite that Kutuzov sent much less dispatches, since I was with him for the majority of the game, I believe, how come that we sent less dispatches yet managed to coordinate the northern attack as well as the central one, the southern one? The Kutuzov had no idea what was going on there. for like the majority of the time, except on first column's part, which was holding off some cavalry at the village of Pratze. That's practically one of the only engagements we knew about. And one thing I wanted to tap on is that the French our coalition northern attack they did actually have orders. See, me and the Kaiser went up there to personally investigate what was going on and see how third column was progressing. I had spoke with third column as they were getting on the move, and actually told them that they were to continue ahead much earlier, since Lieutenant General Wittgenstein's second column had gone ahead much earlier than Kutuzov wanted, even though Kutuzov's orders were to go ahead early. Kutuzov, of course, had a problem with that, and he went to deal with that while I went to the third column. Told them that their advance would have to begin much early on. And then for roleplay purposes, I went up the second column, started yelling at Wittgenstein. Sorry, by the way, I know that you're here in this VC. Dave can contest that he saw me having a huge LARP moment with Wittgenstein and the Russian Imperial Guard commander. Truly a funny moment in the battle. And I can say that I've beat my role quite well. I was pretty accurate to my character, playing as a spoiled prick who consistently wanted to take over command of the battle. And at one point, I think the Russian Imperial Guard commander asked me, should I take orders from Kutuzov or you? And I said, who's the emperor here, Kutuzov or me? And he was like, exactly. So he was like, yeah, I'm just going to follow your orders. And the irony of this is that we didn't face as much as much hierarchy problems as in real life. In real life, Alexander was just consistently trying to take control of the coalition's field army personally. Not to mention that the Russian army made up the majority of the formations. So Alexander had already received payment from the British. If anything, he could just get the fuck out of there and leave the Austrians to their demise, since he had been already paid by the British. So the Austrians really just needed his army. They had no choice but to obey him. But not only that, the Austrian chief of staff was also on the side of Alexander. And historically, Kutuzov was just left out and told that formations and shit were none of his business. He could just sit out the battle. And he tried to delay the movements of the coalition army to abandon the high ground and shit like that. Of course, that did not happen. I was actually much more tolerant with Kutuzov, since I believe he was a fine commander and he had a clear, concise plan. Although we had some problems on arguing about reserves during the battle and how deployments would be carried out, we were eventually able to decide on a clear plan, which me, the Kaiser, and Kutuzov agreed on. And we were able to carry out our deployments just about as well as expected, except for just a single mistake with third column during the evening of the 1st of December, where we had to redeploy them back behind closer to second column. So we had to pull them back slightly because they were overextended, as from what I recall. But one thing I would like to say is I found this to be a very well experience, and I truly had fun. This was perhaps one of the best events, apart from the Cuban Missile. This one, unforgettable event, that one. And I think both Blazer and Cookie, since they're here, as well as the rest of the umpires, of course, very well gifted ones who have been able to deliver reports quite fast. They kept us one thing that was mentioned in the commentators stream is that they were actually able to keep this in real time, which was truly one of the best parts of the battle. They had the battle lasted for 6 hours in the game. The game itself lasted around 6 hours or 7 hours, so
Yeah,
that's
that
pretty
that brings me
close.
to another point. Thank you, Czar, by the way. Um, Blaze, you managed to keep this running pretty efficiently. How did you manage that?
I suppose there's a few things. The main one's probably that each umpire was sort of operating fairly independently from each other, rather than as a, rather than you all go through and get every order, and then everything's resolved as one with the lead umpire leading it. We just sort of we had each umpire or maybe two umpires sort of doing like a section. So each umpire would sort of just manage a player and move all their things, and then we resolved combat in the areas after that. So that sped it up quite a lot. I suppose another thing was I ran a School of the Umpire session for all the umpires right before the game.
Hmm.
So they were all, or some umpires missed that, but most of them were familiar with the system and could resolve combats on their own rather than relying on just a few umpires to do that. So that helped as well. Um, I think we had a lot of experienced umpires as well, so that definitely helped. Um, yeah, they're probably the main reasons.
Outstanding. Cookie, were you wanting to say something?
Well, basically, it really helped that when we got to a lot of fighting, we resectioned off like the battlefield, got the relevant empires in our own separate channels, and did it simultaneously instead of one lead empire, because that would have been taking far too long.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's see here. We are low on time, but I do want to say that this was, a masterpiece, I feel. Dave, do you have any final thoughts or words on this? All right, thank you, Dave. How about you, Achilles?
Yes, again, I just want to say it was a fantastic experience, and I think everybody did a great job. Good, and it was fantastic job by the Fifth Corps of the French Army,
Hmm.
desperately trying to hold on at the very end against impossible odds.
Yeah, it was basically me versus Austerlitz. So
That's right.
the whole thing. Dave, I see you found your mute button.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. But no, I think it was a fantastic event held by Blazer Trail. It was, as you say, it was well timed, fantastic, and of course, the commentary box was full of laughs and you know, yeah, just real fantastic time with everyone involved. I think, and yeah, I wouldn't mind doing it again at some point in some big game in the future, because it is really fascinating getting the thoughts of people in real time, and also, like, the way Blazer Trail gave 5 minutes of his time every few hours just to give an update on what he thought as well, was fantastic. And yeah, all hats off to him and his assistant umpires for such a fantastic game.
Yeah, you really did. I almost wonder if we players deserve what we were presented on a silver platter here. I have some opinions on that, but I'll keep them to myself. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is a masterpiece of an event, and I would like to play it again. I'd actually like to command the French. Um, but I think we ought to run it again, even just as a play-by post wouldn't be a bad idea. Um, it,
I think I'll run another large battle, probably not Austerlitz, but maybe a
mm,
different battle next year sometime. It takes a few months of prep, and I kind of need a rest now. So
yeah,
yeah, but maybe in spring next year or something, I might run
yeah.
something
But
similarly scaled.
if you run something different, then I won't have seen the answers, and that's no advantage to me. Why do I want to play that? I'm joking. All right, guys. Well, I want to thank everyone who tuned in today, and everyone who came up to speak and share their thoughts. This was an outstanding event. I was very proud to be a part of it. Some memories were created for sure. We had a lot of Kriegsspiel moments, which is what this is ultimately about. And that's all for now. So, everyone out there, I want to say thank you for tuning in. I want to say hello to everyone real quick on the live stream, the YouTube. MM, Marvelous Anarchy. Yes, you did. You did a good job. Um, and Michael the Mouse, who's blaming me for the defeat. And you're in the audience too, but I'm not going to pull you up here. We're out of time. But I want to thank you all for your participation. And that's all for now, everyone. I want to say thanks, and I will see you